All good, yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much for coming today, first of all. I stumbled upon Rainfall, that's the truth. Like I just stumbled upon what you're doing. I'm like, whoa, that sounds really interesting. And I could almost like feel the qualities behind somebody who's initiating something like that. So then I'm like, okay, I think I would really love to talk to Amit. And that was the invitation for today. So thank you so much for coming in. To start from the easy questions, I would love to know who is Amit right now? Who is this person that is in front of me? And you can take me wherever you want. You can take me into your business profile, you can take me to your personal, you can take me wherever it feels right now.
Well, for starters, thank you for having me, and you are now officially my first and most favorite stumbled upon rainfall person ever. That's very sweet. Thank you. That's an interesting question, and oftentimes, it's a simple question with a complicated answer. And I tried to simplify that for myself actually 6 years ago, because it's a good question to ask yourself. I advocate this for everyone watching as well. Ask that question of you. And oftentimes, I also advocate that it is not a distinction between business and your personal life, because at the core of who you are and what your purpose is should resonate across everything you do. And for me, that answer became a little bit more succinct about 5.5, 6 years ago, when I was able to identify that for me, having been on the journey that I was, that I would only create, influence, invest in projects, people, and initiatives that created a net positive impact on the humans that they were intended to serve. And it's a relatively short sentence, but it starts to encapsulate the entire of who you are as a being, because you start to resonate in the description of what your purpose is. And when you start to resonate in that, you attract people who resonate with similar purpose philosophies, DNA approaches. And over time, it's not just that it changes the way that your brain is wired. And maybe this sounds a little less concrete, but I think it rewires your soul. And when your soul is rewired, it starts to send out these beautiful messages, and people resonate with those messages, whether they speak to you directly, whether they're in your company, whether they read something somewhere. And I think I love what you said initially, where you saw something about rainfall, but it wasn't just what you read. Something about it resonated with you to want to connect with the people involved in it and behind it. And I think having that kind of purpose and being able to have that authenticity with yourself allows for this to happen, allows for this synchronicity to happen. And so to me, it came down to being able to encapsulate this in one sentence.
I love it. Yeah. And it's exactly as you're saying, it really starts radiating everywhere. Take me back in that moment 6 years ago when this purpose became more concrete. Who were you and what has changed? Like if you look like the two mirrors, one next to the other, the two Amits, let's say 6 years ago and now, what was the biggest difference you can see, or what was the journey from one to another, from point A to point B?
So I would say it wasn't a change or a shift, it was a journey, right? And that is a great representation of our lives, actually. We often think about, I don't know, like boxes of labels and shifting from someone who's unsuccessful to successful, or someone who's like focused on, fossil fuels, to someone who becomes, focused on the planet and green energy. And I think the reality is life is not black or white, it's 50 shades of gray, right? And the shades of gray offer you a chance to go on a journey if you're open to it. So I don't think that I woke up 6 years ago and said, you know what, this Amit ends and this new Amit begins and this journey changes. I would say that my lived experience, my life experience, is the context that I've been in, the privilege that I've had to be surrounded by just incredible human beings who chose to be part of my world and my orbit and let me be part of theirs and their orbit, allowed me to go on this journey And the journey had points of reference throughout the process. It was just a matter of being at that inflection point where I was able to sit back and say, I am doing all of these things. Some of those things have just been evolution. Some of those have been intention. Some of those have been synchronicity, right? Many things in our life, we don't realize it, but they're actually serendipitous. And they're serendipitous because they happen as a byproduct of some of our intent, but they also have a byproduct of much of our resonance because of the who we are and what we're starting to become. And I think all of these things led me to a point where I said, how do I become a little bit more intentional and a little bit more concrete about all of these things that were starting to happen? And some of the things that I could intentionally see that I wanted to defocus from because they were consuming negative energy from and into my being, as opposed to being deeply complementary to, you know, this path that I was going on. And I feel like 6 years ago wasn't necessarily a massive inflection point. It was merely a slightly more intentional culmination of multiple paths that I had been trotting to be able to come to having a little bit more intentionality and creating, you know, it sounds cliched, but a purpose statement, not to be able to say, oh, Aliki, I can tell you in one sentence the why, the who, the how, but more importantly, being able to allow that to resonate internally with me and the way that I operate. And it's brought about a lot of really interesting byproduct because it's made life much easier in terms of being able to apply a lens to what you do, to who you do it with, to who you help, to who you invest in, to what you influence. And if that lens is not being met, then you know immediately what to be able to walk away from and not, you know, invest your time and energy in.
I really like the perspective you're bringing as a lens, because I feel that the purpose in the end is exactly that. It's not really an action, it's practically how you see things and how you embed it in everything that you do, right? I love that you are like your words and your expressions are very nicely putting together like spirituality, a real life, not real life, everyday life. I don't think there is any real life, and purpose and business all together. How is the dance for you? Like, if throughout the time, like, was there any time that they were separate? There wasn't a time that they were coming together. How is the dance of like embedding all your spiritual understanding into what you do as a profession and how you live your life as an individual outside of work?
Yeah, it's like I would say in the metaphor of the dance, it's exactly like the process of dancing. You know, you're not entirely always sure that, you know, you and your partners don't always sync beautifully. Maybe, you know, you're not moving the way you want to move, and then over time you start to find flow, and you start to find flow with the people that, you know, are part of this dance with you, right? And there are other times where you dance alone, and this beautiful, you know, journey of not worrying about whether you look great dancing or not, you know, being able to stand in front of the music and dance in an ecstatic form, in the joy of, you know, what you're experiencing, which is, you know, might sound at times poetic, but there's a lot of friction that comes in that, right? And I think the reality is, again, journeys are not friction free, and that's perfectly okay. And it's not only just okay, but I think the recognition that that is part of the process that actually makes the journey better, that makes the outcomes more robust. And the idea that we often, you know, going back to that metaphor of living in a world that is absolute, living in a world that operates in black or whites, you're a good person, you're a bad person, this I believe in, this I don't. Like, there's so much of that dogmatic ideology in the way that people operate, whether it's politics or that translates down into their daily lives, And it's such a pity because everything that lives in between black and white is where life actually happens, right? Is where you start seeing magic, is where you start seeing growth, where you start seeing people coming together, where you start seeing flow states. And for me, part of, I would say that dance was being okay with dancing like a fool, being okay with being off kilter and off sync with the partner you were dancing with, and allowing that to just flow into, wow, look, we're dancing much better together. And the practical aspect of that is this idea that, there used to be a time when people used to say, like, don't mix business and pleasure, don't do business with your friends. And my response to that is, well, who are you going to do business with then? If you're not going to do business with the people that you love and love the people that you then end up doing business with, what are you doing? We have one life and you're wasting it if you're creating these silly artificial compartments that society has historically done.
Yeah, it's exactly as you're saying. It's if you don't like the people that you're doing business with, and you don't want to do business with the people that you love, there's something there, right? There's something hidden. So, which of all of these steps of the dance have taken you where you are? And I see a lot of focus. At least that's how it looks, right? To data, to what it means actually to have sovereignty with our data, and to the crypto and blockchain world. Maybe not both. Maybe I'm confused with two. What led you there, and what is what part of them attracts you? Like, what part of them is actually fulfilling this purpose in those two baskets, let's say?
Yeah, that's a great question into the genesis of some of the things I've been doing, including Rainfall, right? So I like to abstract, into a little bit of a philosophical realm when I think about why we do the things we do, right? And so a large part of my thinking has always been that if you think about modern society has been built on the idea that human beings are valued based upon physical land that we inhabit, what we find below and what we build on top, right? I call it the oil and toil economy, right? And this is, obviously centuries, right? And one of the biggest challenges of this oil and toil economy, whether it's been, looking for, fossil fuels and minerals and whatever else, and, treading and stripping land to its, whatever it can be extracted from, or whether it was the evolution of the agrarian economy, and then the industrial economy, and then the automated economy, and capital markets and derivative markets, and everything that got built on top. Fundamental challenge is that 95% of the land is owned by 5% of the world's population. So the economic merit, the economic benefit of the oil and toil economy doesn't go to those who truly toiled, right? And we've seen this massive disparity, and with it, we've seen massive amounts of inequality. We've also seen massive amounts of conflict, because again, the oil and toil economy represents resources that are finite, scarce. And so then it's a scarcity-based mindset, and everyone is constantly in battle, if not literally, then economically, culturally, right, socially. And for me, a big part of this journey was the idea that every physical step that anyone takes now also has a digital footprint. And the digital footprint is really interesting because it allows us to start thinking of a postmodern society that values human life not just based out of physical land, but on the virtual, on digital land that we inhabit. And the big advantages of this are that data, which is the byproduct, the only resource, the oil equivalent, or the minerals, or the land, or the farming or whatever equivalent, is essentially abundant. Every year, we're going to produce more and more data. 2020, the world produced $600 trillion gigabytes of data, right? That's to the moon and back, textbooks 11 times over. I mean, that is some incredible amount of data. And if that data can be our individual property because we're producing that data, if we can have the self-sovereignty of that data, suddenly our worth is not just measured on do we own land or not, but our worth is measured based upon the value that can be created from that digital footprint. And those were let's just say, the philosophical underpinnings of this idea behind data self-sovereignty. It wasn't so much that I love data or that, I'm all about the geeky aspects of what we can do with data. It was more about the idea of creating equality, the idea of creating economic foundations and fairness for human beings going forward, not just for those who can spend $8 for a matcha latte in Zurich or San Francisco or what have you, but for the value that the data generated by Rashida, the refugee who lives in, one of the, I sit on the board of the Norwegian Refugee Council, and we have 10 million refugees in our camps around the world at points of most conflict. And how do you ensure that the data being generated about heart rate, pulse rate, number of steps taken, density of population, number of people surrounding Rashida, that is going to be far more indicative of where the viruses of the future show up, rather than, in Zurich or San Francisco. How do we make sure that that value that Rashida is now generating is brought back and she's compensated, right? So you can start thinking of the use cases of not just the people who often operate in the 1% of the world's population in terms of not just wealth, but early access, value, but also for the most vulnerable in society. And for me, this interplay of being able to create that self-sovereignty means that you need to decentralize the current centralized structures that control data, that control the economy, that control currency. And so you can start seeing where that starts connecting with the fundamental principles and the ideas of cryptocurrencies, right? And for me, the entry point into the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain wasn't just from, oh my goodness, let's buy Bitcoin because we can make it, 100x investment or 1,000x or 10,000x. It was, or whose blockchain is better than someone else's, and whose blockchain is faster and bigger and brighter, and who raised more money. Who cares, right? It's that third layer. It's the underlying philosophical layer, which basically allows for data self-sovereignty monetization, which allows for identity on the blockchain, so that Rashida, when she leaves Syria without a passport, can now be given a passport on the blockchain, so that it doesn't matter whether the issuer is still a valid country or not, or a valid organization. Her credentials will always be there, right? It's those kind of aspects that will allow us to change society for the better. It's ironic that from a United States constitutional perspective, we have an opportunity to create a society of, by, and for the people for the first time, because we're decentralizing government or the economy. If you think about this amazing journey that we've all been on, starting from the printing press, which for the first time, democratized knowledge, and then the internet, which democratized access to information, right? We are at this interesting point where for the first time, we have democratized, decentralized currency, economics, right? And you can see for the people who live in Venezuela or in authoritarian regimes in Eastern, in the old Soviet bloc, Argentina with a collapsed economy, that this is life-changing. The ability for young, talented youth to be able to have access to a decentralized currency and not be at the mercy of who printed how much money, in which quantitative easing, in which government. this genuinely changes the game entirely. And for me, those were the underpinnings of why I, kind of entered into this world of decentralization, and in the way that we did it, all kind of tied back together.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand a lot where you're coming from, and I feel that that's the entry point for me also into technology, the interest of where do we want to go, what tools are existing, which are the most promising. Let's use that because that's the boat that is sailing right now, and then it will bring us to the next port to continue the journey. Absolutely. And it's really interesting actually that you are coming from that space, because it's not very common in the crypto world mostly. Usually it's more like from the profitable plane, and slowly understanding how it detaches your the idea of how money is operating. For me personally, I love that we start understanding much more experientially how we can influence actually currencies and economies, when in a fiat your own power is so small you cannot see the ups and downs, when in blockchain you can directly see how you're influencing the whole environment, which I feel it starts breaking down concepts in our mind that were kind of prefixed. So how do you see that evolving? How do you see it growing? How is the future like from your eyes on that direction? And where do you stand in that future also?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so I have this theory that 95% of the narrative in an ecosystem is oftentimes only 5% of the actual work that happens there, right? And you can see this in most places. Take AI, most of the narrative is around Hollywood's version of AI, and, robots, taking over the planet, and, the weaponization of AI, and, and you ask people around the world, not in the 1% bubbles that we all live, but you ask the average person what they understand about AI, and they will tell you a story from a Hollywood movie, right? The price of Bitcoin and all of what came as a byproduct of that tends to dominate the conversations around the world of decentralization. And the reality is that, yes, that's true. A lot of people made very early money, and then that got replicated into the next project and the next project. But when you look at the projects that some of these incredible founders are building, right? When you look at a rainfall-like initiative that is using the blockchain and tokenization that allows for what we hope to be able to create, that is the future of this space, right? And sometimes journeys are non-linear, and journeys tend to be noisy with the wrong things, but we end up getting to, oftentimes, I wouldn't say just the right place, because, take the internet, there's a lot that is negative about the internet, but we live in a society that wouldn't have been possible without the internet, right? When we think about, this gets thrown around a lot, unfortunately. Again, it's a bit like greenwashing in the world of climate and ESG, but the idea of, banking the unbanked, or giving people financial access when they never had it. And it's easy to say some of these things, but if you look at some of the projects and some of the initiatives, they are genuinely headed in that direction, right? And it wouldn't have been possible without some of these exponential technologies. So it's great that Bitcoin gets to 60,000 or 30,000, or when it did at 10,000, and suddenly the world sits up and listens because it's, CNN talking about it, or, your mainstream media channels. Wonderful. It creates a lot of attention. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. That's all fine, right? What some of this distraction does is it starts to fuel industries. It starts to fuel categories. And that fuel, as a byproduct, goes to game-changing platforms, game-changing companies that will actually make a difference going forward. So when you have that decentralized category leader around identity, when you have the decentralized category leader around, carbon credits, when you have that decentralized category leader around data monetization, whether it's rainfall or otherwise, right? Doesn't matter. When you start seeing those kind of results over the next 5-10 years, our distraction for the big shiny object starts to wane, right? And suddenly, whether Elon has tweeted pro Bitcoin or anti Bitcoin, pro Doge or anti Doge, doesn't matter, right? Because we're starting to see these fundamental changes happen to even the most vulnerable in society. So I'm an eternal optimist, and I understand that the I don't know if you heard the phrase, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I'm an optimist. I see it the other way. I say the road not to heaven, but to the continuing experiment that is humanity, right, is bolstered by really good intentions and people who, in a non-linear way, unfortunately, but are working to solve some of the biggest challenges. And I live for that, and I believe that is where we always eventually get to.
I totally feel you on that. I think that doesn't matter the road. In the end, we will end up where we are supposed to, even if we take 100 zigzags. And it's really interesting to see how much we are all moving together practically, and how much it will take us where it's supposed to go in the end. And interesting to observe also the human being struggling or trying or pushing or anything, and in the end it will just go where it's supposed to go altogether. So as we're going towards the closing slowly, I would like to ask you two questions that I just asked to all my interviewers in the end. What do you feel that is your unique gift as a person, and what kind of support do you personally need right now to grow further?
I would love to connect those two things, right? I would say, I don't know about it being a unique gift. I would say the gift of knowing that you cannot achieve anything just by yourself. The quote from Ram Dass always rings true to me. He says, at the end of the day, we're just walking each other home, right?
Hello, that's
And that to me is, I think if you can recognize that, there's I don't mean to use multiple quotes in this, but I love this. There was a question asked to a spiritual leader: how should we treat others? And the answers oftentimes are with empathy, with love, with thoughtfulness. And his response was, there are no others. And that's just just an incredible way to see the world and see humanity. And I think my gift perhaps is recognizing that I don't matter. This is not about me or you. We are walking each other home. And so the more people, the more energy that we have working on some of the biggest challenges, not only is it the biggest gift for each one of us and for all of us collectively, but our ability to solve for these bigger challenges comes from that. So I would tie that to your second question, which is, rainfall as an example. And I speak for in the interest of the larger industry as well, around decentralization only works if, we work together. We work together on solving the biggest challenges. And so my ask would be, for those who resonate with the idea of data self-sovereignty, with the idea of being able to create a minimum income, I use the term, how do we transition not from universal basic income, which is a great idea, but it relies on taxes and governments, to this idea of universal earned income. Because guess what? If you're human, the value of your human life is also measured now by the data footprint you're generating. It's not free, right? You are earning that income that comes to you. And with that, all of the dignity and the rights that come with it, right? And so the journey to universal earned income is a journey that's challenging and difficult. And anyone who resonates with the idea, I welcome And I say in the context of the entire current team of Rainfall, and all of the wonderful people who are involved in the initiative, and partners in the ecosystem, to come and participate. Whether that is as simply as earning from your data, whether that is bringing your special skill to help amplify the message, or new partners, new partnerships. All of that is incredibly helpful, because we don't walk home alone, right?
Thank you so much. I really love the way that you're looking at the world, and the realization of that we together we can really help each other. So just before we go, and we will remain in the same call, we're just gonna go offline from Facebook. I would like to see if there's anything else that you feel like expressing before we close our interview for today. Anything that is coming up, anything that you want to say. It can be also a quote.
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of you to offer the invitation, and I would just say that it's very easy to feel like we're going through very trying times as a world. Certainly the last 2 years, for example, and it's very easy. Often, I feel the same way, to feel defeated and to feel like look, on one hand, billionaires are getting more wealthier than ever before. Elon now has a 360 billion net worth, and there's so many people who are struggling and cannot make ends meet, and we've got a world in conflict, and and our climate and all of these things. And I say to that, wow, what an incredible opportunity for us to be nothing but optimistic and say, wow, we have so many things that we can work on and we can fix. But as long as we believe that we can do this, we believe that there are challenges and it's non-linear, and we believe that we do this together, then the world is honestly our oyster. And so my final thought would be, if that is how we can resonate and operate, then what a great opportunity for us to come together and do that and be more optimistic about the future we want to build. So I know that sounds utopian, but you know what? That's the best way to think about the world that we live in.
If that sounds utopian, we are two here, because that's exactly what I was feeling when the whole situation started. I was excited. I was blissed out, and everybody was like, "Are you crazy?" I'm like, "No, wait a second. It's so exciting times. Things are shifting, and we are here to live them and actually to be part of it." So thank you so much for today. It was beautiful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Aliki, for having me.
Remain on the same call. I would just stop the live streaming. You will probably hear it. Yes. So I have to just stop this live streaming, and I will